we can learn so much from each other. And I think that's where habit breaking or, finding yourself, personal renewal starts. Sort of like, what is it that I can learn from others next to me, left and right, even from my kids, when I'm trying to let go of something, when I'm trying to let go of control.
At Active Life, we believe that the healthcare clinic of the future is the gym.
Everybody starts with the best case scenario in mind.
Never sell anything to anybody who is not in the market for what you have.
The only reason we work out is to create the opportunity to recover.
And the healthcare provider of the future is the coach.
And this is why you guys need to get paid well, because what you're doing is really, really hard work.
Franzi Gonder, welcome to the Active Life podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, I've been excited about this one since Ken Andruko mentioned that I should speak to you about being on the show.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm most interested in digging into with you is just this strategy and the tactical application of belief breaking, because our beliefs have a very strong grip on the decisions that we make, the actions that we take, the people who we become, the people we surround, all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to help you dig into it. So I would love to start the podcast by discussing with you a belief that you forced me to challenge in a simple email reply that you wrote that was probably a nothing burger to you and was a wow for me.
Mm-hmm.
When I reached out to you about doing a pre-interview about coming on the show, you told me you'd be happy to come on the show and to do the pre-interview, but that the following 2 weeks were not going to work because you would be hiking the mountains of Italy with your family and drinking all of the wine.
Right, yes.
Now, the reason that was a wow for me is I have 3 kids. I believe you have 2 or you have 3 as well?
I have 3 boys, yeah.
Right, and they're of similar age, if I'm not mistaken. How old are your boys?
My boys are just 2 from like last week, 3 and 6.
Right, so I'm 2, 4, and 6. So very similar in age.
Yeah.
And the thought of hiking the mountains of Italy with my 2, 4, and 6-year-olds,
mm-hmm.
and then giving myself the space to drink red wine,
mm-hmm.
knowing that they're still there with me,
mm-hmm.
was foreign to me and inspiring. It was like, oh, well, that's something to plan. So I'd love to hear how you do that.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to dig into that. A few years ago, when my husband and I had our first son, we went on a vacation, our first vacation as a family. And we even brought my parents along because we were like, we don't know how challenging it's going to get. And, with all the expectation of relaxing and resting and, enjoying the good life. And we went to Austria and none of those things happened, right? We didn't relax. It wasn't particularly calm or quiet or peaceful. But we did drink red wine. And afterwards I said to my husband, it was like, this concept doesn't work anymore. Like this whole vacation is such a relaxing thing because we're family now. And I kind of left it at that for a little while until my husband got back to me in a few weeks later, kind of randomly, and said, you know what, I think we need to reframe family vacations as adventures. Because then we're all in the same spirit and we're all carrying the same energy. And we're basically adjusting to our kids' energy rather than our kids should be adjusting to ours because they're kids and that's not what they're supposed to do. And just sitting in that, and I looked at him and I was like, that is so liberating. Yes. I love adventure. We all do. Most of us. And so that's when we started to go on road trips, 16, 18-hour road trips. And it's frustrating at times and it's, very loud at times, but it's bringing the adventure spirit back up always sort of helps us to make sure we're creating memories with our children. And that's pretty much, I think, what I would say to them.
Well, what's the difference between a vacation and an adventure?
I think it's just like the traditional expectation that we have around vacation. It's this sort of like relaxing, sort of like, I have to come back from vacation and be all rejuvenated and well rested and have slept for at least 10 hours every night, and those kind of things, so that when I get back to work, I feel a lot more productive, present, just not as jaded, maybe even.
And so you had that belief prior to your first vacation with the kids?
I did not. I think it's because I sort of like my own boss for kind of always have been. And so I never really created life around me where I felt like I had to go on vacation from my work. But the idea of going on vacation to do all the things that are particularly good for me was there. And that doesn't really work with kids anymore. I'm sure you're very aware of that too.
Yeah. One of the things I've talked to my wife about is that the perfect vacation for me is first half trip, adventure, second half vacation, relax. And maybe this doesn't need to be a second half. It's the end cap, Yeah. And I selfishly would like to take my kids. I enjoy my kids. I like them. Like, I genuinely am happy that they are alive. I think that I would love for you to dig into more of in the moment, the mental shift that happens when you're in the RV, for example. You're in the car. It's an 18-hour road trip, and the kids are whining. I want to watch this. I want a snack. I need to go to the bathroom. I don't want to do that, because kids are going to do that. It doesn't matter how well you parent. Kids are going to do that, I think. Mm-hmm. So for me, that immediately goes to deep breath, allow it to pass. And then if it doesn't pass, it goes to, okay, I lack the skills to deal with this, which is why I haven't done it. My wife and I went on a 6-hour road trip with the kids a few years ago, and it was not enjoyable. And we're about to do it again. And I'm looking for a way to shift the way that I think.
This is a multi-layered answer.
Great.
So the first thing that seems a little bit more obvious than others maybe is it's always a choice. It's a choice for me to look at my kids as, they're loud, everybody has to go to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff. Like, I can perceive that as annoying, or I can perceive that as a human need that those tiny humans have, and they rely on me to make sure that I navigate the situation very, very well for them, right? So it's a choice for me to sort of like perceive it as stress, or breathe into that, soften my shoulders, unclench my jaw, and be like, okay, he has to go to the bathroom. It is what it is, and that is much more a habit than it is anything else, because it doesn't come naturally to us necessarily, and you have to do it over and over and over again until you see the benefits for yourself too. Oh, I don't need to be stressed about that. Oh, I don't need to make it a conditioned tendency of mine to like freak out everybody, every time someone has to go to the bathroom, even though we just went 40 minutes ago. I don't need to react to that. Oh, that feels very liberating for me too, right? It basically subtracts a stress factor in my life. And my body probably is very happy about that too, because, we don't need the cortisol. So I think that's the first layer. And then the second layer that might go a little bit deeper into how your kids are going to grow up is, what's the intergenerational ambience that you're creating by being the stressed parent? What are your kids going to do when they have kids? Are they going to sort of like, are they wired the same way and like, have a lot of like stress responses that are not good for them, not good for their kids? What is the kind of like notion that you want to create around what it means to have a meaningful experience and navigating tricky, stressful, ambivalent situations as a team.
Well, so I'll share with you what I've done in micro doses. And I'm curious to your thoughts, because it's something that I've been able to apply across not only familial situations, but also business situations and personal achievement situations. It's shifting my expectation. So, for example, when I drive for talks I'm going to give, if it's a 4-hour trip, I'm not stopping. The plan is not to stop unless I absolutely need to go to the bathroom. So I prep everything. I get in the car, I plot my trip, and I go. And I expect it to take 4 hours. When I'm in the car with the kids, I don't allow myself to have that same expectation, because I know, okay, a 6-hour trip could be a 10-hour trip. And so when I shift my expectation to we're leaving at 8 in the morning and we're going to get there at noon, or we're going to get there at 2, to we're leaving at 8 in the morning and we're going to get there by 8 o'clock at night. And who cares what happens on the way, because what's the difference? What is the deadline?
Where do we have to be at that point?
Right.
Nowhere.
Right. That allows me to have a little bit less stress about the situation. And that just, to me, that just comes down to expectation setting. Is that something that you build into your work with yourself, with your clients, or is it something that's totally different from that?
It's a good question. I think expectation is almost like a very obvious first step when you're trying to detach yourself from something that you're accustomed to. And the second step would be to give yourself the liberating moment of having a choice. So I feel like, living in expectation, and then dropping the expectation is a first step of realizing how powerful it is to have a choice around something. So yeah, I think for someone who has a hard time letting go, for someone who is experiencing control in his life a lot because he or she has to, CEO, a founder, something along those lines. That's a really good place to start. What are your expectations? What is the control that you're trying to, gain here? And how would it look differently if you let it go?
I think that's a really good point that you bring up. I've always been in the position of control in my businesses, in my income, in what I'm doing day in and day out. So like I wake up, if it's on my schedule, it's because I've decided I want that on my schedule. Every single thing. And then when you start doing things with kids, you're not like, you need to be able to submit to the fact that you're not going to have control over everything, because if you try to have control over everything, you're not going to have a good time.
And then what else is there that I might be able to take from my kids that I could use, in that moment, like their sheer joy of just being in the present moment, right? Letting go of the control for 2 weeks and letting my kids tell me what it is that we're going to do, and understand that there is a lot of fun in just, jumping in and out of the pool 65 times within 20 minutes, like that. I mean, that's like, that's a real exercise in presence, right? And almost like spirituality almost, but for many of us. But I think we can learn so much from each other. And I think that's where habit breaking or, finding yourself, personal renewal starts. Sort of like, what is it that I can learn from others next to me, left and right, even from my kids, when I'm trying to let go of something, when I'm trying to let go of control.
I agree with you. And I'm glad that you transitioned it there, because I want to be careful that this podcast is not all about being a parent on a road trip.
Yes.
And I have, when I was getting ready to have my first kid, there's an experience that I had with my wife where we were walking, and I bring this up in almost every talk that I give, because I think it's relatable, and I think it's really grounding.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was working countless hours, 75, 80, 90-hour work weeks. And my wife was pregnant. I wasn't earning a lot of money at the time by anyone's standards in any country, in any demographic within that country. And as we were walking, my wife says to me, I don't want to be a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't meaning that she was going to leave me or that we were heading for divorce. What she meant was, I want a father figure in this kid's life, and you are never home. And the secondary part of that was, and what you're doing isn't working, without her having to tell me what you're doing isn't working. So we started to change what success looked like. And part of success stopped looking like achievement in dollar amounts. And it started looking like being able to be on the boardwalk in our town, going on a walk with my wife and my kids, absolutely no later than 6 o'clock, out of the office by 5:30.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes, well, what must be true about my day for me in order to go on that walk at 6 o'clock?
Mm-hmm.
And when I started putting those constraints in, everything else started to happen, because you start to cut out all of the things that are tertiary. And what you said there was a really valuable way to transition into that, which is the idea of, what can I learn from the situation? How can I be present? How can the kids teach me something that can be applied in the other part of my life?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any experiences that you can speak to where you having kids taught you something about yourself in your business, in your life?
Yeah. Well, now we're going deep really fast.
Listen, when I was growing up, high school and college, I live in a beach town. We had a rule. If you put your toes in the water, any one of us are allowed to just full sprint tackle you into the water.
Here we go.
So
you just did that for me.
That's it. So we used to
you just like tackled me into the water.
That's it.
All right.
That's it.
Let's go. So I come from a similar background, 70 and 90 hours work week, like love it, no need to change. And then I got pregnant unexpectedly, welcomed and with a lot of love, but it was still a surprise. Mm-hmm. So because I also come from a very dysfunctional family background, or dysfunctional family, I knew very early in my life that when I have kids, I need my life, my family life, to be harmonious. That's all I knew for myself. And when I became an entrepreneur, what I found out for myself is that my family is as much of a startup than my startup is.
Which came first, by the way? Were you a business person?
My entrepreneurial journey as a founder came first, and then I eventually met my now husband.
Okay.
And so I always, at home, I always phrased it that love is a startup too. And that concept has guided me through the highest highs and the lowest lows of my life. Like, to remind me that iterating is incredibly important when I'm building my family and, want to bring in the work and make sure that everything gets done and everybody feels taken care of. But what it meant in particular, and this is a very particular moment in my life, is when I had my first and my third son. I had very severe postpartum anxiety. And part of now I know that the reason of it is ultimately that I hadn't integrated my father's death in 2013 at all.
What do you mean? What do you mean you hadn't integrated it?
It means that I hadn't integrated what that loss meant to me on a personal, emotional, and physical level. Like, I hadn't, basically, the way I always talk to my clients about it is sort of like, when you want to find out where certain things sit in your body, sort of like, where did loss sit in my body? Loss said like right under my heart for me. And I always, after my father's death and when I had my first son, I always had this sort of like nervous feeling right there. And I just wasn't aware of it, really. And when I slipped into the anxiety, what happened is that I learned to work with that nervous feeling under my heart. It taught me that I was someone who fears loss a lot. And all of a sudden I was looking back at my life and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened all my life. Like I've always been sort of like hunting down connection, making sure I'm connected with as many people as possible. And for this, for many reasons, but especially also because my parents got divorced very early and they didn't have a good relationship at all. And so it was a very tricky childhood. And so now when I look back on that, I know, sorry, I think we have to do this again. This is a lot of background noise for me. So, when I look back at this moment in my life now, what I feel is just so much work that I didn't know I had to do in the moments of anxiety. Like we learn how to cope with anxiety. We learn how to like get rid of anxiety, but we don't learn how to like sit in anxiety and basically be like, how does this anxiety feel like? What does it do to me? Where does it sit? Why does it sit where it sits? How can I move it out, move it into my hands, look at it and be like, I'm going to tackle this with you. You're part of me. You're there for a reason. And you're there to protect me. Like our body's always in our favor, right? That's what I always say. And so if we have anxiety, then our body's still in our favor, because it tells us that we're overwhelmed and, all of that stuff. And so, I think I want to make sure I'll let your next question come in, but I feel like that's a first answer to that.
My next question always comes off of your last answer. So I don't have a list of questions written down.
No, I know. I'm just, yeah.
So you're speaking to how you are able to now take an anxiety that, for example, you experienced after the loss of your father that you hadn't necessarily properly mourned, properly coped with, properly strategized how it's going to affect the rest of your life and where you need to fill the holes that you didn't anticipate were going to exist. Then you have your first kid and did you say you had anxiety after your first kid or after your second and third?
First and third. Don't ask me why, but that's what happens.
No, yeah. You know, it's interesting. My wife and I had similar experience. Yeah. She had the most postpartum mood disorder after the first and the third, mostly after the third. And we actually did a full podcast about that. I think that for her, the third thing was a lot about closure.
Yeah.
We're not doing this again. And I don't know if I'm ready to be done or not, but I don't want to climb into her head. That would be her story to tell. Right. What I found interesting and that I want to go back to is you talked about where you felt it. And then how you move it from there to your hands to observe. And I think that for a lot of people listening to this, that could sound very what I like to call California woo-woo. And you're in Germany, right? So it's certainly not California. Yeah. And I think that if people stop for a moment and actually give themselves the ability to think, and then they ask somebody who they know, do you feel the same thing? And they'll find that the answer is yes. But the way in which somebody feels it is often very different. Like for example, when I have what I would call micro anxiety, which is conversational anxiety, I want to say the next thing. For me, that next thing is in my throat. Right? Like it's I gotta get this out. And if I don't say something, my throat feels like it's just growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
For my wife, that feeling is in her belly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I found it interesting that you described yours as being below your heart and then trying to move it to your belly. I mean, to your hand for observation. What does it mean to feel things in different places?
That's very hard to, I don't think there's a sort of like an obvious answer to this. Mm-hmm. It very depends on the person, very much depends on the person. So I see, interestingly, I see a lot of men in particular holding things in their throat and in their shoulders. Mm-hmm. And more often I see women holding their undigested emotions in their belly and the gut. One of the reasons is that women are much more into.
You cut out for a moment. Did you say your belly and your gut?
Mm-hmm, belly and gut, exactly. Okay. And the reason for that is that a lot of women are a lot more intuition based, but that we, growing up, not necessarily have learned how to use it as a powerful source of wisdom. The same applies, and I'll go into that, but like the same applies also to men who like learned how to like not express their emotions.
Mm-hmm. I want, if it's okay, I want to stop you there because I have two questions, and you just nailed both. I wonder how much of what you just described, women having undigested wisdom and men having unexpressed emotions, comes down to gender role and expectation of what they're supposed to do in their gender. And I'm curious as to your thoughts on that. And then I want to get into, because I think this is a good transition to start talking about beliefs and how we break them and change them when appropriate, or observe them. But what are your thoughts around that? You know, the idea that men don't cry and show emotion because it shows weakness, and women aren't assertive because when they are, it's considered bitchy or annoying. Which, by the way, I'm not expressing that either of those are my views. It's the internal view that people often have.
Totally. Yeah, I wish my husband was here because we talk a lot about like masculinity in our household and modern masculinity. And he's someone who's always ready for a good cry. But it's definitely, there's definitely something to it, but because of the social tendencies or conditioned tendencies that we have grown up with. So a boy who's heard his entire life, don't be a girl, boys don't cry, toughen up, dude, those kind of things. The chances that this little boy learns how to like keep things, right here and sort of like swallow it. By the way, the swallowing also moves down, right? So over time, it usually all lands in the belly. But that's a psychosomatic sort of like symptom where something that you've heard for a very long time, internalized, and then made it a habit, is just part of who you are. And so that's why we see so many men, with the conditioned tendencies around like feeling tightness in their voice box or in their throat.
What you said there is really interesting, because what I've experienced personally in my past is throating it, and then later when I'm by myself, bellying it. It's like, okay, well, when I'm public, throat that. You just keep that in, and then because if you speak about the way that you decided to feel, it can potentially be weakness that somebody else will say, okay, I can exploit that weakness over and over and over again if I choose to, which isn't necessarily true. It's just where my head has gone in the past. And then when I've observed it after the fact, and then when you're home later by yourself, you've had a chance to look at those thoughts and think about it. Then you start to get the belly anxiety of, I could have done something different in the moment. I should have done something different in the moment. I hope that next time this happens, I have the wherewithal to do something different. And that's belly. So that is interesting you brought that up.
Yeah. It's, and I think in that exact moment that you're describing, it's not about what would I do differently next time, but much more about sitting with that emotion that just like went into your belly and then say, what is it trying to tell me? And also, what is my body protecting me from? Right? Like that question is oftentimes such a huge trigger for all of us because we don't think about it that way. We don't think about it in a way where it's like our body's protecting us from something, because we have made that decision to act this way really, really, really long time ago, most of the time in our childhood. So if we look at it that way, then things that come up a lot are like, oh, I've been told by my father that it's not the right place to voice my emotions, basically, ever. And I should just go and get my homework done and be a good performer and, not make a big fuss about it. And this is what we usually find when we go into those exact somatic sensations, right? It's sort of like, where does it come from? What's a really early memory of that feeling in your gut? And because only then, when we really understand where it comes from, we can sort of like say, okay, like, is it something that I really still need? Or have I outgrown this a long time ago, but it's still somatically, so physically integrated in my body that needs release? And then we can let go of that.
It's so crazy to me.
Yeah.
How interwoven our decisions and our beliefs are with the way that other people end up interpreting the world. And as a parent, it's most obvious, but I'll give an example that recently happened, and then I have another question I want to ask to stay on track. I have my 4-year-old. She's probably the most emotionally aware of our 3 kids. And the other day, she wasn't getting the attention that she was looking for, and so she started acting out. And when our kids act out, my wife and I have a practice of giving them what we believe they need instead of what we know that they want. Because if we give them exactly what they want in that moment, then acting out becomes the thing they do to get the thing that they want. Yeah. And so, we told her, I understand that you're frustrated right now. I want you to spend some time and, allow yourself to calm down and then come tell us what it is that you're frustrated about. And she came out about 30 seconds later and said, I don't know why I'm frustrated, but and then she started acting up again. And I said, let me give you a hug. And I hugged her and I said, I think you just need a little bit of love. She held me in a tight hug for like 3 minutes. And then when she loosened up, I loosened up, and she was smiling and she was happy. And I was like, wow, like a 3-minute embrace. That's a long embrace. And so I believe that kids just grow up to become adults.
Yeah.
And if adults have never dealt with the stuff like that in the past, well, then
exactly.
We act up and we need that 3-minute hug from another adult sometimes. I sometimes become overwhelmed personally by my belief that it's my responsibility to work harder in every conversation than the other person I'm talking to make sure that I am really trying to understand what it is that they seek to achieve in that conversation, what they're trying to say, how they want to be heard, instead of making the assumption. So I'll ask questions. I will stay in the moment longer. I will pause before I respond. How do we know? How do we know if we're doing the right thing? Because what you're speaking to leads me to a path of perpetual questioning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. In somatic leadership coaching, there's one thing that always stuck with me, which is every human being looks for safety, belonging, and dignity. And when I started looking at my relationships in my life that way, I felt like I was moving into a more human experience with the people that I love or the people that I work with, instead of moving into a relationship of power. And that was incredibly helpful. I was seeing them for what they were really saying. I was sort of like seeing a smaller version of themselves, really craving that hug, and looking for the belonging and the safety in that conversation. If they were, let's say, constantly asking, do you think so too? Is that right? Is there anything else that I'm missing here? It's sort of like, where does that assurance come from? Like the ask for assurance come from? And so I think all of those big questions that you're asking all go back to, how satisfied are we all with our sense of belonging, dignity, safety?
Well, and so when we mentor trainers, coaches, one of the meetings, ultimately, they all end up asking us like, okay, so is everything nothing then? Because one of the activities that we ask the coaches to go through is, write down 3 exercises that you believe are absolutely essential that everybody be able to do in some way, shape, or form. They write it down, and then we say, now over the course of the next 10 minutes, write down all of the reasons why that actually might not be true. Why is it possible? Why is a squat, for example, potentially absolutely irrelevant? Why is a deadlift absolutely irrelevant? Why are pull-ups absolutely, write it down. Why are they absolutely irrelevant? Is there somebody in the world who doesn't need that? And if there's one, are there many? And if there are many, have we perhaps conflated the value of that movement? And the purpose of that is not so that they can believe that nothing is important. It's to believe that nothing is finite, that there's no absolutes, there's no dogma to anything. I don't know that business leaders and people are challenged in that way about their own beliefs about day-to-day activities. I'm the owner of our company at Active Life. That doesn't mean I make all the rules. But when people do things that frustrate me, I need to address that this is frustrating me, and perhaps we need a rule about it. Let's come up with one together. So how do people challenge their own beliefs, get to a place of this is better for now without losing their way altogether?
One of the things that I recently wrote was the power to re-choose. And re-choose in the light of understanding whether the opposite of what we believe is also true. So in many of the exercises that I go through with my people, we go into a space and here are my values, and I say, how's the opposite true of that value? And they say, well, of course it's true. And so, okay, so why is that value that you're holding then, important to you? And the exercise is not so much in order to discard their truth, but it's to understand that truth is fluid, and that truth has something very, there's a timestamp to it oftentimes. I might believe that democracy, what a weird example, but I might believe that democracy is the right thing for our world right now. But as I, move through life, make new experiences, reflect, do the deep work, find myself, all of the good stuff, I might find a better solution that I personally believe is true. And if I'm a world leader, then the chances are that I insist on sort of like implementing that.
Well, if we bring, I want to bring that to a level that I think is easily understood. If we bring that into a gym setting, for example, having a democracy in the gym setting would mean that each of the members are able to decide what each of the coaches are going to do, because they're the volume. The coaches are then going to take that message up to ownership and say, this is what the members want us to tell you that they need to do. And so you need to do this. Mm-hmm. And in business, that can become, for lack of a better way to describe it, the inmates running the asylum. And so it's easy for me to see where in governments and in larger organizations, why there is a time for democratic leadership, why there's a time for authoritative leadership, why there's a time for affiliative leadership, like why all of these different kinds of leadership have a place during different times, during different moments. Like, for example, when COVID hit last year, early last year, no disrespect to our team, I wasn't interested in their opinions. We needed to move. We needed to move quickly, and we needed to move certainly, even if we were moving improperly. And that was my belief, and that's what allowed us to get through that moment.
That's crisis management.
Yes.
That's a very different leadership move than 80 to 90% of the moves that you do on a daily basis when things are either calm or you're trying to implement a new feature in your program.
Yes.
Right. But the reason why you can do that, what you did, is because they trust you, and you have built that trust in your team over time. That's called the trust bank account, right? So you took out a few trust coins by moving kind of like, I don't really care what you're thinking. I'm just going to move anyway.
We definitely we went back and had to replenish that for sure. For sure.
But what happens or what should happen in leadership is that you perceive sort of like what everybody is dancing tango with, right? Like, what is everybody's sort of like problem or challenge or bottleneck? What is everybody's experience in the company? And you find the average of that, and then continue to think about how that still fits into the organizational strategy, right? And how you can make that work. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But the communication, the way you communicate it, coming out of that thought process on what the next step is, that is the most important part, right? You don't want to tell them that you own the truth and that's why you're moving, in direction X. You want to say, hey, I've listened to, some of you, I've talked to some of you, I assessed the situation a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that X, Y, Z, right? And I think what that does is, and we're coming back to the sort of like sense of belonging, safety, dignity, is that you support your people feeling safe, feeling like they belong into this organization because you consider them and their dignity is untouched, right? And that is more important than anything else, because ultimately the productivity of your entire organization depends on not just how people are getting their work done, but how they're feeling when they go home. So.
Well, I think that's huge. It's the idea of it's easy. It's easy to treat everybody the way that you're treating yourself. It's hard to treat people the way that they need to be treated, because the way that I want to be treated when I go home is, oh, you have new information that can change the way something goes. Tell it to me now. Because I will act on it immediately. And what I've come to learn is that is not necessarily how our staff or anybody else functions. And one of the strategies that I've been able to employ, I'm curious about your thoughts on it, is I will wake up at midnight with a thought. And I can't just write that thought in a notebook and leave it for the morning. I won't fall back to sleep. I need to know that an action's been taken on it, at least for now. And so what I used to do is fire off an email to a staff member. Because I'm like, all right, it's email. They don't have to check their email if they don't want to. And, they'll check it when it's appropriate for them. And then I would get an email back like moments later. And I'm like, fuck. So what I started doing was writing an email and scheduling it for send for later in the day, the next day, and writing myself a note to remind myself, you wrote an email to this person that is going to send at this time on the next day. And then when I wake up, I can read that email and say, is that the email that I wanted to send last night? Is it an email that I was sending in the moment? Is it an email? It gives me more freedom to make sure that they're getting the message I want.
Well, what have you done in that moment?
In which moment?
Like, what have you employed?
In the thought moment between? I like to ask myself a series of questions that I don't necessarily do intentionally. The series of questions might be, what is the action that I hope will happen after this email is read? Did I share in this email the action that I'm hoping will occur because I sent this email? What is the reason that I want that action to be taken? Did I share that reason in this email in a way that this person is going to be able to understand and interpret as my beliefs and my intention, not necessarily a reflection of their effort thus far? Those are really the things that I want to be considering, because what I find is I'm very good with direct information. I want to be told, you need to do this better. You're not doing this well. Other people don't necessarily want that.
Have you always been that way? Or was that a journey for you too?
To realize that, or that I want that?
Both.
To realize that, yes. To want that, no. I've always wanted that. I was always the guy on a sports team where if the coach said, if the coach was telling me all the things I was doing well and I knew something else was coming, I'm like, I don't need the compliments. Just tell me what you need me to do. And when I hired a coach back in about 2016, I thought it was a business coach. Turned out to be a much more of a life coach than a business coach. He was the one who taught me that not everybody wants to be talked to that way, that not everybody wants to think that way, and that the actions that I'm taking are actually pushing people away rather than drawing people in because of the way that I want to be treated and the way that they want to be treated. The simple example was, and this is where I got to the idea of challenge your own beliefs. He told me that I had a member who had quit on voicemail, and it really pissed me off because I considered this member a friend. I considered this member an ally to the gym. We went through some dark times, and this person was there for me during these dark times. And then they decided to leave the gym on voicemail after I had asked them to stop doing something very privately in the gym. And I took it personally. And he's like, you can't. I said, why not? He said, because if you had a conversation with them and asked them why, to them, that is a high conflict situation. To you, until they have punched you in the face and drawn blood, it is not a high conflict situation.
Exactly.
And they know that. So they know how high conflict you're comfortable going and being very comfortable in the moment without intending to upset them. And they know how much conflict they can tolerate. And it's nowhere near that. So they're not going to approach the conversation.
Yeah.
And he's like, and you can't take that personally because it's your lack of awareness that that's what you do to these people. And I'm like, oh, shit. How often do I do that? And the answer really was all the time.
Yeah. If I would frame it for you, if I would reflect back on you right now, what happened is that you integrated a version of yourself that you knew was always alive, which is the person who always wants an answer. You integrated that. You became aware of that. And you said, this is the person I want to be. Right. I've always been that way, but now I get it. Right. And what you've also done is that you integrated it with all the understanding of how you want to be treated, and found a solution for, the many people that you're serving. Well, and that
did help. And the other thing that happened for me in that relationship was I got challenged on the reason why I do things. And no one had ever done that before. And so what happened there was, I know you work with business people, you work on leadership development, and I want to actually ask what somatic coaching is in a moment, but so remind me to come back to that. It's been the next question 7 different times already. But he asked me, why do you do what you do? And I told him, I want to provide for my family. I want to leave a legacy, and I want to change an industry. And this is the way I can do those things. And he said, you know, that's a cute story that you tell yourself when you go to bed at night. It's a shame it's not the truth. And I said, what? And he said, well, you're not even making $30,000 a year right now. You're not providing for your family. Are there other things that you could do that would more certainly help you provide for your family? I said, yeah. He's like, well, then scratch that one off the list. You know, if unfortunately, if your family passed away in an accident, would you stop doing what you're doing? I said, no. He's like, well, then stop pretending that they're the reason why you do it. You know, he went and basically knocked off all of the things I was describing. And that actually set me on probably the darkest personal development month of my life. Because it was this, why do I do anything? I have no idea. I'm just on autopilot, and I've been lying to myself because it was an easy lie to believe, but it's not true. And that was the hardest month of my personal development.
I don't think that it wasn't true. It wasn't true anymore.
Well, no, what I mean by it wasn't true was I didn't get into what I was like. Before, something you don't know about me is before I got into owning gyms and clinics, I got offered a job that would have made me high 6 figures, low 7 figures in the first 1 to 5 years. And I turned it down for the opportunity to do what I was really passionate about. So I wasn't making decisions based on providing for my family. I was making decisions based on doing things I really enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's reasonable. But I never really faced that.
I do believe that in order to integrate our journeys throughout our entire life, it is important to understand why providing for your family was one of the things that did come up.
I can tell you why now after having revisited it.
Yeah.
It's everything around ego.
Yeah, exactly.
Of being able to say, I can go out and hunt in the modern world and take care of a family. That's it.
It's a picture of masculinity.
Yes. Well, it was my exact image of masculinity. It was on the shelf with a light on it, with a case around it.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. And that also comes from somewhere, right? The way
my father did it.
Exactly.
You know, my father did it. My grandfather did it on one side of the family. My grandfather on the other side of the family didn't, and he struggled with the reality that he didn't. Yes. So
there's a good reason why you thought that was one of the reasons why you do what you do. Yes. Right. Until you broke away from that and said, actually, you know, even though intergenerationally that is our narrative, it's not my narrative, really.
And what's interesting for me is it's still important to me.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I'm able to observe it for what it is, which is liberating. It's no longer, it's difficult to describe. But it went from being a thing that because I didn't fully understand it, it felt like a weight, to being a thing that now that I do fully understand it, it's a pursuit that I enjoy. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not who you are, but what you do. Yeah. There's so much beauty when we think about why do we believe what we believe? How do we know what we know and what we don't know? Like in all of those big questions, there's so much beauty in just saying all of the things that I have ever believed to be true that are not true to me anymore, or that I'm trying to outgrow or I'm outgrowing. They all have held incredible importance to me until now. And now I'm ready to move into the next chapter. And if we would all move more into sort of like a portfolio or flow picture image of life, right? If I would consider my life more as a flow or portfolio, then I would not be so rigid and so hard on myself when I make mistakes, because it's just all part of the same me, of the same journey, of the same sort of like, picture that I'm trying to draw while I'm driving the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm drawing while I'm like, steering. And that is so much more important than to know at every moment in time what I think is true or not, right? A meaningful human experience is not created by saying like, I believe in, what I do is providing for my family is the most important thing in my entire life, because you're basically closing yourself off to the idea that there's something else available to you out there that you have no idea about it yet, but it might come, and it will give you an even richer experience and, maybe a more fulfilling moment, while the same piece of providing for your family still holds true.
What I find so interesting about all of that is bringing the kids back into it. My brother-in-law is a police officer, great guy. I really like him. He's great to my sister. When my daughter, who's 6, was asking about, what police officers do to me, she was saying like, oh, so they get the bad guys. And I explained to her, and I was really happy that I caught myself in the moment having this conversation. I said, there really is no such thing as a bad guy. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, everybody is doing what they believe to be the right thing.
Exactly.
In every single moment.
Yeah.
And so the bad guy, the person that you're thinking of as the bad guy, might have needed food for his family. Not everybody can, can just come home to dinner. And we have rules that we follow, and the policemen protect those rules. It doesn't make the person who broke the rule a bad person. Just like if you broke a rule in school, you're not a bad person. And I was really inspired by the conversation that came from that, from my 6-year-old daughter, about like, oh, well then, but why can't people get food? Like it was cool to be able to go down that rabbit hole with her.
Break it down. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and my hope is that I'm constantly breaking these structural beliefs that kids grow up with, that I grew up with, of no fault of my own parents. It was just we weren't thinking about these kinds of things in my household. My parents had certain thoughts, like the curse words in our house sounded more like can't. I heard plenty of fuck, shit, all that. I heard it. I never heard the word can't. That wasn't allowed. I am part of that on my kids. I love that. But so I want to get to the question. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, it's okay. I think I'm going to come back to it.
Okay. What is a transformational and somatic coach? I've been enjoying the conversation with you so much, I've forgotten to ask you what it is.
Yeah. So when I got into coaching, which happened because I had a leadership coach myself for a very long time, and realized that a lot of the things that I did in my previous company, future-proofing startups, in short, was coaching founders. I just never called it that way. And my leadership coach then said to me at the end of our engagement, she said, Franzi, you really need to become a leadership coach. I think you will be really great at it. And I was very young at the time. And so I had a lot of like imposter syndrome. It's like, I can't do it now. This is crazy. What a big leap, da-di-da. When my father passed away and I went through those sort of like moments of anxiety in my life, I did a lot of very deep healing, very deep self-work. I promised to myself that I would that I would try to avoid any medication. Also just like a personal history on that. But, and so I went from being a, CrossFit 4 days a week, and then a run, and then, all of the things that sort of like spiral your nervous system to the max, to like someone who meditated, someone who centered, someone who took long, deep bath, like all of those things in order to sort of like regulate myself, regulate my breath. And through that journey, I realized so many of my childhood traumas and so many of my conditioned tendencies. Conditioned tendencies are basically another big word for really bad habits or perceptions that I have of the world that, you know, are just perceptions and nothing else. And why do we have perceptions? Well, we have perceptions because this is how we got to know the world and how it works based on the memories and experience that we made or were exposed to as a kid. And so that's how I got to somatic coaching, through like a lot of research and a husband who's like a martial artist. And this is where it comes from.
What is somatic coaching?
Somatic coaching is the ability to sort of like, through conversation, go into your body through taking a few deep breaths, nothing groundbreaking. And let's say I'll take my anxiety as an example. Let's say I have this flattering, this feeling of like a butterfly, a very nervous butterfly right below my heart. And my somatic coach tells me, okay, so where does it come from? And I say, I don't know. And he says, okay, so what's an early memory of that feeling? And I go really deep inside of myself and ask, like, just, you know, don't try to think so much, but really try to feel like, where does that feeling come from? Where have I seen it before? And we're basically using the sort of like the physical responses that my body gives me in moments of distress, in moments of anxiety, in moments of indecisiveness, in moments of inability to make big decisions in comfort and with a lot of like self-esteem, like all the typical leadership challenges that everybody's going through, right? And so we're using our body to sort of like go deeper into that and say, like, where does it come from? Why is that keeping you stuck? Why is that not a strength of yours, but instead you consider it a weakness? And our body is the container of our deepest memories. We just store a lot of it away as part of moving on in life. And so I'll try to dig it up, and then we go into very sort of like quote unquote traditional leadership development work, but based on some very deep insights that usually free people up and gives them a lot more clarity around like what they need to communicate and, you know, who they are. It opens them up to, you know, understanding other people a lot better because they can see how their emotions have held them back. And so other people probably have the same, you know, condition like we all do. And yeah. And so it's really just a way to work with the body, to unleash yourself. And
so how is it different than traditional therapy, if you will?
Traditional therapy is conversational. So it still happens a lot in the head. And so I can usually, the things that I tell you that happen in my head are usually things that I have thought about already. So there's always a personal bias in there somehow. And I usually have answers to the uncomfortable questions in order to protect myself from going deeper into the uncomfortable part. And so the body doesn't hold back if you allow it to. And that's where we find release.
So you're basically asking about, like you're asking about those physical feelings.
Sensation.
Right. And then you're able to navigate the stories that lead to those feelings.
Yeah.
And then observe them and decide if that's the feeling that we want to get when we have that story. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah. We unpack our own truth.
So how often do you find yourself talking to people who don't know what to say? You know, I'm imagining, I went through a session one time, I believe it was called, I think it was called REM meditation. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was basically, I laid there with my eyes closed, and the practitioner was asking me, you know, asking me questions that got my energy stirred up, and then started asking me, what color is the energy? What shape is the energy? Where's the location of the energy? This is the same kind of thing, what I'm talking about?
Yeah, very similar. Very similar. The beauty of it is that you can sort of like accept where you are no matter what you feel. If you, the fact that someone could say, actually, I don't feel anything is a huge feeling.
Is a what feeling?
It's a huge feeling.
Okay.
Because a lot of what a trauma response, especially for veterans, for instance, is that they stop feeling anything. They become numb to physical sensations, as an example. And so if someone has gone through all the different sort of like personal development, leadership development stages that they could go through, and still tell me, you know, I just can't hone in on that impact that I'm trying to create with my people. My organization is not getting where it's supposed to, you know, where it's supposed to be. And I say, okay, how does it make you feel? Nervous, angry, whatever. So it's okay. Where do you feel that anger? Oh, I don't feel that anger. Oh, okay. So why do you think you're not feeling that anger? What is it protecting you from? What is your body protecting you from by not feeling it?
Well, so can we go back a step there?
Please.
So when I'm answering those questions in my head.
Yes.
And for me, it becomes, if you're giving me the choices that you gave me and I'm having to choose one, it's belly and it's anger. And it's anger because of the impact that I believe we could be having and we're not. And it's anger largely with myself for failing to communicate the direction, failing to understand the direction and then communicate it, and failure to provide the appropriate resources to be able to move at the speed that I want us to be able to move. And I put that on me. Now,
Correct.
What is the value of being able to feel that and being able to express that as compared to, I guess not? Because I can tell you all those things. It doesn't change the fact that it still makes me angry and we're still not moving as fast as I would like to move. But the person who can tell you how it makes them feel is in the same position as me, is what it feels like.
If you understand the root of your anger, you can start to choose whether you want to continue to feel that anger, or whether you want to transform it into something else.
How would you transform it into something else?
So when you feel anger in your belly and you just listed all of those things that, feel like, this is why we're not making the impact that we should be making. And you put it all on you. Where does that come from? Where does that sort of like that notion of like, that is all on me?
Yeah, it comes from, I can tell you, it comes from me understanding that I need to allow people to perform in the environment that is available. And so my responsibility is to create the environment. And so if they're performing in a way that is 99% of what they want, that 1% I deduct is I either have the wrong people, which I don't believe I do, or I've created the wrong environment, which I believe is my responsibility. And that's where it all comes from.
So what fear, what deep-rooted fear that you've experienced before in your life is that?
I don't think it's a deep-rooted fear that I've experienced in my life. I think that it's a big part of it is, I'll go back actually. I think a part of it is that I feel like the people who we most serve as a company are currently being bullied by the industries that we aim to reimagine. And every moment that we spend not stepping in between the bully and the victim is a moment that that victim continues to be victimized, whether they realize it or not. That pisses me off.
Can I share what comes up for me when I hear you talk? I sense a fear of inadequacy.
Okay.
Like, am I not that you're saying that to yourself, right? Am I inadequate enough to bring this company to the point where, we're winning the fight, where we're protecting the victim?
I don't know if it's my own fear of inadequacy, because what I can tell you is, I'll add to that answer. What I can tell you is that I have failed more things in more ways than I believe most people have tried. And I don't fear that failure again. And I don't fear what that failure would mean about me personally if it didn't happen. What I do fear is a solutionless industry, a solutionless society that, for me, it's, I think I talked about this on a podcast recently. I'm going on vacation to a place that I really don't like with my wife. And we're going there because she loves that place. And I observed the reason. I sat with it and I said, why do I hate this place so much? And the reason why I hate the place so much is because it caters to an audience of people who are very unhealthy. And they're very unhealthy physically, and they're very unhealthy emotionally, I think. There's a lot of excess drinking. There's a lot of excess eating. There's a lot of just things that I don't value in my life. So maybe unhealthy is the wrong word. I just don't share values with what's going on there. And I see the businesses that are there predatorily attracting the people who it serves to come. And it didn't bother me that all of that happens. What bothered me was that there was nobody who was doing anything about it. There was nobody who was showing the people who were there, spending their money, spending their dreams, spending their future on things that I'm actually opposed to, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And when I realized that, I actually shifted the direction of our company ever so slightly, because I realized that we exist to be the solution to those problems, and we're not.
So you're saying you're not the solution to that?
We weren't moving in a direction to be the solution to that.
But
problem.
Now you are.
Yes.
So you continue to adjust to this. I think maybe this is your thing, right? Like the moment when you sense inadequacy, quote unquote, right? Whether in your business or with yourself, you immediately adjust.
That's definitely true.
You find a solution. Becoming aware of that is one of your superpowers, right? And is, let me phrase it differently, more eagerly, will be such a strong force in moments when you need to remind yourself that you are. Right. There will always be moments where, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? And then you think, well, wait a minute. I know, because I found out that I am someone who's really good at shifting towards making small steps and fighting the inadequacy. Right. And that will ultimately kick new creative processes into gear. This is how our brain works, right? Our brain works with sort of like those small bits of like inspiring information that we find about ourselves. And so anything that you can find out about yourself that sits deep down whether you want to release it or whether you learn more about like your superpowers, is a conscious win for your business.
I'm internalizing that.
Okay.
I'm trying to integrate what you just said there.
Let me know if I can add some flavor.
Well, you know what I'm drawn to and what you just said, what I keep going back to is what I would consider to be my superpower is the rate of implementation. Right? So I decide that's not good enough, I kill it. Like it's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. And I have no emotional tie to it just because it was sentimental to me when we were in it. The problem that leads me to is most people don't move in the same speed and discard emotional things. And so what happens, I'll give you an example. We have a program that we produced back in 2015 that we call our Bulletproof programs. And they're meant to help people with their joint health. There might not be anything I hate more in our company than the name Bulletproof for our programs. I don't like that we call people athletes either, and we're working on improving both of them. But for me, it's, okay, those are dead. Let's come up with new things. And there are reasonable answers to why that can't happen. Reasonable answers like, well, we have SEO built around that. We've already built these marketing funnels around that. There's all of these things that we spent months putting in place to make those things viable. And you're saying if we change the name, everything is good. But if we change the name, all those things also have to change. To me, I'm like, yeah, okay, change them. But it's irresponsible of me to make that decision on behalf of our entire company. When our company was me and 3 or 4 other people, we had those Bulletproof programs running, and they were generating right around $60,000 a month, 60, with about 90% margin. When I looked into them and saw that most of the people who were buying them weren't using them. They were buying them, but they weren't using them. I canceled them. I cut $60,000 of business out of our company like that because I didn't like the way it made me feel that we had.
Here we go. Right? Here we go.
Yeah, because we had a product that people were buying and not using, and I felt like we were the Planet Fitness of template programs, and I hated that. And I didn't. And I like to be somebody who does what I say I believe is important to do.
Yeah, but are you still that person when you do it 20 minutes, 60 minutes a day later and have time to sort of like think about the communication and the way to make it relatable to others?
I am.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I've gotten much better at it. Much better at it. But that is. Good. I'm sorry, I'm getting back to that, and I say this with so much love and respect too. Oh, I take it.
But that is fear of, like, it's like if we can't sit with that something that is not as perfect as you'd like it to be, right? Like you want the absolute best for yourself, for your company, for your family, and that is like so admirable. But sometimes our best strength get also in the way of our deepest, of the things not that we want, but that we need, which might be deeper human connection, right? Deeper relatability, and all of which is safety, connection, dignity, like all of the things that we discussed before, right? So in the rush of growing a business, up and right, like, how do we make sure that we also go deep with the people that are working there so that they understand why we are going always up and right?
And I think that's a fair way to describe it. I do fear inadequacy of our message aligning with our action.
Yeah. And you're adjusting, and I say this to a lot of founders in particular that I work with, is like realizing that you are the top 1 to 3% of human sort of like thoughtfulness or mindfulness already, right? Because you're already like 5 to 10 steps ahead, right? You're always adjusting the top 5% of your business, which you should be, right? This is your job. But that doesn't mean that the things that are currently existing are not like supporting and impacting a lot of people, right? So taking another day or two, or a week, even if it's reasonable, to think like, what is it that we can do to make sure that this is communicated done in the blah 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 appropriately, just adds sort of like, let's the sense of rush in your body sort of like move out and move into a stage of sort of like conscious and practical decision making.
Yeah, in hindsight, I wouldn't have cut a $60,000 piece of revenue off our company. I would have asked, why aren't people accessing it? Mm-hmm. Can we spend some of that money to help people better access it?
I would have thought the same. Yeah. Like, wow, that was a really quick decision he made there.
Yeah, lesson learned. We're bringing them back. Yeah. And I think that that's something that is probably relatable for other business owners out there, that they, and I'm happy to be the one who makes the mistake that they can learn from and talk
totally.
about it.
Yeah. Like, and this is why I always love to bring this quote back, which is like, I teach so I can learn, right? Mm-hmm. And I learn so I can teach.
Yeah.
We're all one, right? By you making the mistake and you and I exchanging it, even if just like 2 people take it and run with it and impact another 500 people with it. Well, here we go, right? 500 people.
Yeah.
So, it's good that we're all sharing our mistakes publicly.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was fun going down that memory lane. Mm-hmm. Franzi, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think would help people who are going to listen to this to observe their beliefs from a different lens and perhaps start to question some of them and change some of them? I'm asking you this because perhaps one of the most profound things that was ever taught to me was stop to think about what you're thinking about before you decide what to do about it. Mm-hmm. And that, that led me to releasing a lot of anger I had with a lot of people. It led me to releasing a lot of blame I would cast on myself for not achieving some of the things that I thought I should have achieved at the time, because I'm very achievement oriented.
I would have not thought so.
Really?
I'm just kidding.
I know. But so I'm curious if there's anything that I didn't give you the opportunity to speak about that you think would help people challenge their own beliefs.
Thank you. I think as a starting point is to start observing your own thoughts. And start to observe your own truth. Observe them how, though? And I ask you this I'll give an analogy or a metaphor. If we tell somebody to observe the ocean, from where? What am I looking for? Because if we and I understand that there's you can tell someone to look at, or you can tell them where to look and let them see what they want. Is that what you're saying? Stop being so direct about it? No. So if I look at an ocean, I see an ocean for about probably 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. And then my mind starts shifting. I see the kids that are playing on the beach, and then I think about how I used to play on the beach with my mother. And when I think about my mother, I think about how much we've been through. And when I think about how much we've been through, I think about how much I love her. And when I think about how much I love her, I think about how grateful I am that I get to experience that same story with my own children. And then I think about, I should really be at the beach more often. Mm-hmm. And so that simple exercise of just staring at something and letting your thoughts flow and then writing them down could tell you so much about where you're at, and without judging it, just observing it. And there's an exercise that I love doing, which is, and I send it to a lot of my clients. It's like a check-in mechanism. It's sort of like, where are you feeling things this week? Just where? Anything, right? Oh, I'm feeling a tingly in my right shoulder. What are you thinking about this week? Well, I'm thinking about, I don't know, how I've been not acting enough on that big to-do list that I have in front of me. And then the next question is, what's your next thought? Wow, I've been really judging myself for this, and have been instead of just doing things, I have been procrastinating, and that is my tendency to self-sabotage myself. So sometimes we just have to start super simple in order to sort of like let the bigger interpretation or the bigger meaning behind it for ourselves come through, because that is the only way for us to move into a state of like bringing the unconscious alive, like turning the unconscious into something conscious. Otherwise, we're just projecting, right? Like the moment I just sort of like look at the beach and have all the answers to why I love the beach. Oh, I love beach because it's, I love the sand and the weather and the climate and like, yeah, I know all of this already. But if I just let go, right? Let the control of my mind go and just sort of like start to wonder, and sort of like almost like use my breath to sort of like, when I inhale, let it all like sort of like mix up, and then like swoosh it all down into my body, and thus feel more things in my body, then that's a first good step. Just learn with yourself, discover yourself, be curious about yourself, be curious about what you might be wrong about. Ask yourself whether the opposite of what you're thinking is also true. And have fun with it. Like, don't take yourself too seriously on all of this. The human experience is such a wild ride, right? And all we can do is really just make the most out of it and just like have a lot of fun growing. Like, it's all we're here for. If we just do it, coming back to our children, if we just do it so that our children have a different experience around growth, that it's not heavy and not like, it doesn't need to be like a heavy topic, or we're not talking about shedding trauma all the time or whatever it is, but just because it's cool to grow and have new insights and make people happy and leave a legacy, right? Mm-hmm. Why not? That sounds good.
I love it.
So don't make it heavy. Have fun.
Franzi, where can people find you?
Where can people find me? They can find me on thedeepfitleader.com.
Thedeepfitleader.com?
Thedeepfitleader.com. I'm working on that website right now. So, that's the first place to go. I also write on Substack, which is thedeepfitleader.substack.com. And I'm on all the typical social media platforms. Probably if you type in Franziska Gonder, I'll definitely pop up.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for giving us the space to explore so many unknowns.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life podcast. If you did, please be sure to head to wherever you listened to it and give us a quality review, as well as 5 stars if you can spare them. If you want more from us, feel free to follow all of our social media accounts at Active Life Professional, Active Life RX, and Dr. Sean Pastuch on Instagram. Remember, at Active Life, we believe that the healthcare clinic of the future is the gym, and the healthcare provider of the future is the coach. We also believe that future is now. Time, bro.